August 23rd, 1914. A canal in Belgium. 70,000 British soldiers crouched behind a waterway, watching 160,000 Germans march towards them. The British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, had been in France for barely 2 weeks. Most had never fired a shot in anger. And now they faced the full weight of the Imperial German Army's right wing, the hammer intended to crush France in 6 weeks. The Germans expected easy victory. They'd steamrolled through Belgium, smashing fortresses that were supposed to hold for months. French armies had been thrown back in confusion. And this small British force, these contemptibles, as Kaiser Wilhelm reportedly called them, would be swept aside like everyone else. But the Germans hadn't reckoned with one thing. The British professional soldier could fire 15 aimed shots per minute with his Lee-Enfield rifle. In the chaos of battle, German commanders would swear they were facing machine guns. They weren't. Just British infantry, doing what they'd trained to do their entire careers. Stand, aim, fire, reload. Again and again and again, until the enemy stopped coming. This is the story of Mons, Britain's first battle of the Great War. The day when 70,000 regulars held a canal against an army more than twice their size. And the birth of a legend, the Old Contemptibles, the professional soldiers who went to France in 1914 and fought with skill so extraordinary that Germans couldn't believe what they were facing. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're diving into the BEF's finest hour, the moment when British military professionalism met German mass, when training defeated numbers, and when rifle fire so rapid and accurate became the stuff of legend. But before we get to that canal outside Mons, before we watch British riflemen stop German columns in their tracks, we need to understand how Britain ended up fighting in Belgium at all. Because without knowing Britain's decision to go to war, you can't appreciate what the BEF achieved, or what it cost. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, make sure you're subscribed. We've got dozens more battles lined up. The victories that built an empire, the stands that defined a nation. Don't miss them. Let's go back to August 4th, 1914. When Britain declared war on Germany. The Great War started because of a Serbian nationalist assassinating an Austrian archduke in Sarajevo. Austria declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilised to support Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia and France. German war plans required invading France through Belgium, and Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality since 1839. When German armies crossed into Belgium on August 4th, Britain faced a choice. Honour the guarantee or abandon it. Parliament voted for war. Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey famously remarked, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." He was right. Britain couldn't stand aside while Germany crushed France and dominated the continent. The balance of power, Britain's traditional strategic interest, demanded intervention. The British Expeditionary Force was Britain's regular professional army, designed for imperial policing and small colonial wars. It numbered about 160,000 men total, with roughly 100,000 available for deployment to France. By European standards, it was tiny. France fielded millions. Germany fielded millions. Britain fielded one large Cornwallis. But what the BF lacked in size, it made up in quality. These were professional soldiers, not conscripts. They'd volunteered for military service, trained for years, served across the empire. They were fit, disciplined, and, most importantly, superbly trained in marksmanship. The British Army had been traumatised by the Boer War, where colonial farmers armed with modern rifles had embarrassed the world's greatest empire. British generals learned hard lessons. Individual marksmanship mattered, fire discipline won battles, and every soldier needed to shoot straight under pressure. After 1902, the British Army became obsessed with rifle training. Every British infantryman spent hundreds of hours on the rifle range. He learned to hit targets at 300 yards. He learned to fire rapidly without wasting ammunition. He learned to estimate range by eye, to adjust for wind, to control his breathing between shots. Most importantly, he learned the mad minute, a training exercise where he had 60 seconds to fire as many aimed shots as possible at a target 300 yards away. A trained infantryman could fire 15 rounds in that minute and hit the target with at least 12. That was the minimum standard. Good shots managed 20 rounds. Excellent marksmen reached 25. The record was supposedly 38 rounds in 1 minute. 38 aimed shots. That's one every 1.5 seconds. Loading, aiming, firing, ejecting the spent cartridge. Loading again, acquiring the target, firing. It was extraordinary. It required muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions, hand-eye coordination honed by endless practice, and nerves of steel to maintain accuracy under time pressure. British NCOs drilled this obsessively. Recruits practiced the mad minute until their shoulders ached from the rifle's recoil, until they could work the bolt in their sleep, until 15 rounds in 60 seconds felt natural. Officers inspected targets, counted hits, noted misses. Soldiers who couldn't meet the standard drilled until they could. The entire British Army became focused on rapid, accurate rifle fire as the foundation of infantry combat. The weapon that made this possible was the short-magazine Lee-Enfield rifle, the SMLE, affectionately called Smelly by the troops. It was a bolt-action rifle holding 10 rounds in a magazine. The bolt action was smooth, fast and reliable. A trained soldier could work that bolt so quickly it blurred. And British soldiers trained until they could do it in their sleep. The BF also had excellent artillery, 18-pounder field guns that were mobile, accurate and deadly. British gunners were professionals who trained in precision fire support, and the BEF had some machine guns, though not nearly enough. But the real firepower came from the infantry with their rifles. And on August 23rd at Mons, the world would see what British rifle fire could achieve. Field Marshal Sir John French commanded the BEF. He was a cavalry officer, brave but not brilliant, who'd earned his reputation in the Boer War. Under him were 2 corps commanders, Haig commanding 1 corps and Smith-Dorrien commanding 2nd Corps. Smith-Dorrien's 2nd Corps would bear the brunt of the fighting at Mons. The BEF landed in France in mid-August and marched into Belgium alongside the French 5th Army. The plan was to meet the German advance and hold them while French armies attacked elsewhere. But German numbers were staggering. The right wing of the German assault, commanded by von Kluck's 1st Army, had over 150,000 men, and they were heading straight for the BAF. On August 22nd, the BF reached Mons, a grimy Belgian mining town about 30 miles southwest of Brussels. Smith-Dorrien's 2nd Corps deployed along the Mons-Condé Canal, a waterway that formed a natural defensive line. The canal was about 60 feet wide, lined with factories, slag heaps and miners' cottages. It wasn't ideal terrain, but it was defensible. British soldiers dug in along the canal's southern bank. They occupied houses, fortified bridges, prepared firing positions. They knew Germans were coming. They didn't know how many. Cavalry patrols reported large German columns moving towards them, but the fog of war obscured the true scale. British commanders thought they faced maybe 1 or 2 German corps. They actually faced an entire army, 7 divisions, over 160,000 men. Here's a question worth considering. If you were a British soldier on August 22nd, digging in along that canal, knowing Germans were coming but not knowing how many, would you be confident? You're a professional, well-trained, well-armed. But you're about to fight the German army, which has a reputation for efficiency and ruthlessness. Would you trust your training, or would you be terrified? Let me know in the comments. The night of August 22nd, 23rd was tense. British soldiers tried to sleep, knowing morning would bring battle. Some wrote letters home, others cleaned weapons obsessively. A few prayed, most just waited. At dawn on August 23rd, German artillery opened fire. British positions along the canal erupted with shell fire. The Germans had artillery superiority. More guns, heavier calibers, better observation. British soldiers crouched in their trenches and firing positions, enduring the barrage, waiting for the infantry assault. Around 9 a.m, German infantry appeared. Long grey-clad columns marching in formation toward the canal. The Germans advanced with parade ground discipline, their officers on horseback, regimental colours flying, bands playing in some sectors. They advanced with the confidence of an army that had already won every engagement, expecting British resistance to collapse, like Belgian and French resistance had collapsed before them. German soldiers had been told the British were a small, demoralised force that would break at the first serious attack. They were marching into a killing zone, and they didn't know it. British officers crouched behind canal banks and in fortified houses, watching through binoculars as the grey masses approached. They estimated ranges, selected targets, passed quiet orders to their men. Soldiers checked their rifles one last time, made sure magazines were full, settled into firing positions. The tension was unbearable. Watching the enemy approach, knowing the slaughter that was about to begin, waiting for the order that would unleash it, British officers waited until the Germans were within 300, 400 yards, effective rifle range where trained marksmen could hit man-sized targets reliably. Some officers wanted to wait longer, to let the Germans come even closer for maximum effect. Others worried about German artillery supporting the advance. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon and shots would be wasted on distant targets. Too late and Germans might reach the canal before enough could be killed. Then they gave the order. Fire. The rifle fire that erupted from British positions was unlike anything the Germans had experienced. 15 aimed shots per minute, per man. Multiply that by thousands of infantrymen, and the effect was devastating, apocalyptic. The sound was a continuous crackle, like tearing cloth, but louder, angrier, relentless. The air filled with the smell of cordite, the smoke of thousands of rifles firing simultaneously. German soldiers fell in windows. Entire sections were wiped out in seconds. Officers on horseback, easy targets, were shot from their saddles before they could give orders. Men trying to deploy from column into firing lines were cut down before they could form up. Soldiers who took cover behind whatever they could find discovered that British marksmanship made no cover safe. Heads that appeared for a moment to shoot were targeted instantly. The German advance simply stopped. Men going to ground, unable to advance, unable to retreat, pinned by fire so accurate and sustained that movement meant death. German commanders thought they'd run into British machine gun positions. Multiple machine guns, they assumed, perhaps dozens of them. They couldn't conceive that rifle fire alone could produce such volume, such accuracy, such sustained devastation. But it was rifles. Lee-Enfields in the hands of professionals who'd trained for years, who'd practiced the mad minute thousands of times, who could work their rifle bolts without thinking. One German officer later wrote, "We could see no target, only flashes from loopholes and windows, but men fell, and men fell, and men fell, and we could not understand how so few British could shoot so many Germans." The first German assaults broke against the canal defences. The Germans regrouped and attacked again. And again, they brought up more artillery, more infantry. They tried to flank British positions, to find weak points. But everywhere they attacked, they met that same withering rifle fire. At some points, the fighting became desperate. German infantry reached the canal and tried to cross bridges or swim across. British soldiers shot them in the water. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted at bridge crossings, where Germans managed to establish footholds. Bayonets, rifle butts, grenades. Combat at arm's length where training and courage determined survival. The Royal Fusiliers defending Nimy Bridge fought with particular ferocity. Lieutenant Maurice Dees commanded the machine gun section at the bridge. He was wounded multiple times but refused to leave his gun, directing fire until he was killed. Private Sidney Godley took over the gun, holding the bridge alone while his comrades withdrew until he was badly wounded and captured. Both men would receive the Victoria Cross, the first VCs of the Great War. The battle raged all day. German attacks continued with remorseless pressure. They had numbers, artillery, and determination. British casualties mounted. Units were ground down by shell fire and infantry assaults. By afternoon, it was clear the BEF couldn't hold indefinitely against such overwhelming force. But the British had achieved something crucial. They delayed the German advance by a full day. Von Kluck's First Army, which had expected to brush aside British resistance in an hour, had been fought to a standstill for 8 hours. German casualties were significant. Estimates range from 2,000 to 5,000 killed and wounded. British casualties were about 1,600. The BEF had inflicted 3 times the casualties they'd received against an enemy more than twice their size. By evening, Field Marshal French ordered withdrawal. The BEF couldn't stay at Mons. They'd be outflanked and destroyed if they remained. So they retreated south, fighting rearguard actions at Le Cateau and elsewhere, buying time for French armies to regroup. The retreat from Mons would last 2 weeks, covering 250 miles, and end at the Marne, where the Allies would finally stop the German advance. But Mons mattered for reasons beyond tactics. It proved British soldiers could fight and win against the German army. It showed that professional training, marksmanship, and discipline could overcome numerical odds, and it created a legend. Kaiser Wilhelm II reportedly issued an order referring to the BEF as that contemptible little army. The actual quote, if it existed, may have been more nuanced. German military documents refer to the BEF as small but professional, a kleinere, aber gut ausgebildete Armee. Whether Wilhelm used the exact word contemptible, verachtlich in German, is debated by historians. No definitive German order using that specific word has been found in archives. But British soldiers believed he said it, and British newspapers reported it. The story spread through the ranks like wildfire, and they wore the insult as a badge of honour, turning an enemy's contempt into a mark of pride. The soldiers who fought at Mons and survived the first months of the war called themselves the Old Contemptibles. The name carried multiple meanings. They were old because they were professional regulars with years of service, unlike the volunteers and conscripts who'd come later. They were contemptible because the Kaiser had supposedly called them that, and they'd proved him catastrophically wrong. They were the professionals, the regulars, the men who'd held the line when Britain needed them most. Most would be dead or wounded by 1915, replaced by Kitchener's new army volunteers, and eventually by conscripts. But their legacy endured through the entire war and beyond. There's another legend from Mons that deserves mention, the Angels of Mons. Soldiers later reported seeing angelic figures in the sky during the battle, protecting British troops, deflecting German bullets. Was it real? Mass hallucination from exhaustion and terror? Propaganda invented afterward to boost morale? Historians debate endlessly, and no definitive answer exists. But the men who fought at Mons believed they had seen something miraculous. And in the context of what they had endured, outnumbered 2-1, outgunned, holding against impossible odds, perhaps they had witnessed something miraculous. Ordinary men doing extraordinary things through sheer professional skill and courage. The BF's rifle fire at Mons became legendary. German soldiers who survived spoke with awe of the machine gun fire that had torn through their ranks. They couldn't believe rifles alone had produced such devastating volume. But British soldiers knew the truth. It was training, discipline, and the mad, minute drills they'd practiced thousands of times. At Mons, that training saved lives, stopped an army, and bought time for the Allies to regroup. The Great War would drag on for 4 more years. The BEF would grow from 100,000 professionals to millions of volunteers and conscripts. The battles would become grinding attritional nightmares where casualties were measured in hundreds of thousands. But Mons remained special. The first battle, the proof that Britain could fight, and the birthplace of the Old Contemptibles. The casualties tell part of the story. British losses at Mons, approximately 1,600 killed, wounded, and missing. German losses, estimates vary from 2,000 to 5,000. The BEF inflicted 3-1 casualties against an enemy more than twice their size. That's not luck, that's professional military excellence. After Mons, the BEF retreated south for 2 weeks, fighting rearguard actions, before turning to fight at the Marne in early September. The Marne stopped the German advance, saved Paris, and turned the war into the trench stalemate that would define the Western Front for 4 years. But Mons had bought the time needed to reach the Marne, and proved British soldiers could stand against the German army. The Old Contemptibles who survived Mons would fight through 1914 and into 1915. Most would be casualties by year's end, killed, wounded, or exhausted. The BF that went to France in August 1914 was essentially destroyed by December, replaced by volunteers joining after Britain's professional army had held the line. But their achievement resonates through history. At Mons, 70,000 British soldiers faced 160,000 Germans, and fought them to a standstill through professional skill. They proved training mattered, that marksmanship could overcome numbers, and that British soldiers could stand against Europe's best army. The rifle that made it possible, the Lee-Enfield, served the British Army through both world wars and beyond. It was robust, reliable, and fast. In trained hands, it was the finest infantry rifle of its era. And at Mons, it proved its worth. The legacy of Mons extends beyond tactics. It established the BEF's reputation, proved Britain's commitment, and gave soldiers confidence they could defeat Germans in combat. That psychological impact mattered as much as the tactical achievement. Mons proved British soldiers could win. If this is the kind of history that fascinates you, the first battles, the moments when ordinary men achieved extraordinary things, the stands that defined a generation, then you know what to do. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The stories that mattered told the way they deserved.